There you go.
Thank you. Kia tau mai te maramatanga, kia tau mai te rangamarie, kia tau mai te kaha me te aroha mō tēnei kaupapa hui e tai iki e.
Thank you. So just a bit of housekeeping to start, and I need to acknowledge that we've got councillors on Zoom this morning. So we've got Councillor Dowler, Councillor Hill, Councillor Butler. Location for new people, locations of the toilets are out to the side, just out through the doors. The media may be present later in the meeting. I don't see them here today, but certainly they may join us, so just bear that in mind. And I'd like to introduce the Service and Strategy Manager, John Ridd. And I think, John, you've met most of the people that are here today. And welcome.
Oh, awesome. Thank you very much. And kia ora to those who haven't met on screen.
Oh. Doesn't look like that one's working. Use this one for a moment. We'll fix it.
Morena to everyone on screen. Hi guys, we'll catch up at some point, I presume.
Okay, so we'll start this morning with apologies, and my understanding was Councillor Walker. Are there any other apologies? Would someone like to move that apology be received? Move Councillor Tasman, seconded Councillor Ogilvie. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
That's a fine. And thank you for Deputy Mayor Bryant for stepping in with Councillor Hill, my Deputy Chair, being on Zoom today. Right, so public forum, Stephen Todd. You'd like to come forward, Stephen? You get 5 minutes, but the Deputy Mayor says you've come a long way, so we'll give you an extra minute if you need it, but I'm sure you can get the message to us early. If you press that button.
How are we going? Thanks for having us today. I'm just here to give Federated Farmers' view on the biostrategy, and on that, yeah, the policy team's view on the biostrategy is that their main view would be that it should be left until the government biodiversity stuff's sorted out before the council adopts policy. In saying that, I can see the merits and why we're looking at putting policy through, and putting policy through, and it's buying the council time to do it. The main concerns that I'd like to speak to on that are that it might end up overly strict and onerous on farmers and on rural private landowners, and especially in that being that it might end up somewhere, if it gets hijacked by council staff or something on the way through, end up somewhere where it's not intended to be. That would be the main concern. Also on that, we have that farming, and that has a lot of hills to climb already, regulatory policy things and costs and that way, and putting too much extra strain on the system unduly, might lead us down with a lot of wasted money and going down rabbit holes. The other side of it is if we end up with something that we implement now, or council implements now, and it's overly strict, and the council's throwing money at it, there might be a lot of council money wasted and chasing that as well, and doing that unduly, as the government's stuff at the moment. Federated Farmers is objecting to a lot of it, and I've got a list here of what Federated Farmers is objecting to in the NP SIB stands in the exposure draft. So essentially, policy's point of view on this, or Federated Farmers' point of view on this, was that they'd like to see it left till biodiversity stuff's worked through with the government. But yeah, we don't have that say, I suppose. The SNAs and that sort of thing have been a pretty topical thing, especially probably in my region. And I just urge caution that way how it's approached with farmers, because rightly or wrongly, farmers are pretty wound up and beaten up over the last few years with a lot of policy coming at them. And just urge caution the way it's approached. And with that in mind, really, because we don't want to, people getting too much for them or lashing out, and you guys being in the firing line as a council or staff, or it even comes back on us. We lose membership as well when things come out like that, and they jump up and down and say, "Why haven't you done something about it?" So it's right across the board. The feeling gets felt everywhere. So it'd just be great to have that side of it well thought through. And I don't know that there's probably a great way, and people aren't going to be overly happy, or a lot of farmers aren't going to be overly happy in any way when wetlands and that sort of thing start popping up. They're not that popular, but if we can attack it the best way we can, it'd be much appreciated. And on that, I've got a sheet here that's just got a quick outline of all the things that we were objecting to in the national policy statement for Indigenous biodiversity. Just so you sort of know where Federated Farmers stands out. I don't know if that helps you at all, but
You'll leave us a copy of that?
yeah, I'll leave you a copy. I've got heap copies here, so you can each take one. And at least then you sort of got an idea of where we're standing on it. And the main things that we don't want to see is, if it's adopted now, if it being stricter than what's going to come out in the end of the government, and then we've both council and private have probably wasted money chasing things that they didn't need to, and being too strict and overly onerous, really. So no, that's probably it from me.
Okay, so are there any questions of clarification?
We want a clarification. So two questions of clarification. Has there been discussions, conversations between members of Federated Farmers itself, and the policy team with the council staff over the draft strategy that we're considering today? Question one. And second question, the understanding that we have is that by adopting a strategy now, that gives us 10 years to work through what the implications of the NPSIB might be. Whereas if we don't have one adopted prior to, then we've got a much shorter time frame to implement whatever comes out of the NPSIB. So has that conversation been had with Federated Farmers as well?
Yeah, that conversation's been had with policy, and the two concerns are on the top here, were the immediate outcomes and the priority actions, protection of restoration of biodiversity. It's got the pages, objective 6, page 19, and then the restoration of the biodiversity on private land, objective 7, and just the fact that they might get overly onerous. Personally, from my perspective, I can see where you're coming from as a farmer, and I don't necessarily think you're doing the wrong thing. It's just as long as they don't get hijacked and too onerous, as would be the concern that they end up, depending who's running, what oversight they've got. If that ended up too onerous, then it would be a big burden on farmers and people. If that's not so bad and acceptable, then yeah.
Well, that's a clear message to us and to the staff. So, yep, well received. If you'd like to leave a copy, if you can hand a copy to the mayor.
Okay.
Councillor Hill, do you have a question of clarification?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Just wanted to check that you are part of the policy team and just what your role is in Feds and if this is a representation too of, say, Golden Bay Feds and others. Thank you.
I'm not part of the policy team. I'm the Nelson president for Federated Farmers, and it's a representation of Golden Bay and our policy team that works on our regional policy. So the bit of paper that Tim's now handing out's come from the regional policy team.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Todd. Message received.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Right, so we'll move on now. Any declarations of interest for today? None? Right. So we've got confirmation of minutes of the strategy and policy meeting held on the 7th of July to be confirmed. Have we got a mover? Councillor Tufnell, seconded Councillor McKenzie. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. And we'll move on. First of all, to my chair's report. It can be taken as read. What I can add is that we have had that meeting with Kangaora. That was on the 16th. And as a result of that, Dwayne is going to be meeting with them on a monthly basis with his team. So we're going to have some dialogue with them, and hopefully we can get some movement in our district in terms of social housing to help us going forward. But you'll see a presentation later on from Habitat Humanity in a confidential session where they are certainly making some progress. So any questions, or would someone like to move my report? Move, Councillor Turley. Have you got a question?
No, I'm happy to move up there.
All right. You going to second? Councillor Bryan, are you happy to second? No other comments? Right, so we'll put the report. Moved, Councillor Turley, seconded Councillor Bryan. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right. So we'll move on now to the Richmond South Waterways Updated Program. And I think, Wuta, this is under your name. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. The report outlines the proposed objectives for the Richmond South Waterways Upgrade Program, which is required to service growth in Richmond South. So the future works that these objectives apply to can be seen as a continuation of the Boar Creek upgrades in Richmond West. And all the future upgrades in Richmond South will eventually connect to Boar Creek. The objectives reflect the intention to create a multi-purpose green corridor that provide capacity for stormwater flows. And I guess the weather today is a good reminder that we shouldn't undercook it from that perspective. However, it also provides ecological improvements for aquatic habitats, walking and cycling connections, and a community space for recreation and amenity. That's what the objectives, the proposed objectives reflect. So the last time some high-level objectives were set for this important community space was in 2010, when Council adopted the designation for this corridor. These proposed updated objectives reflect changes in climate change assumptions, growth assumptions, recent adopted plans and strategies such as the stormwater strategy, the Richmond Catchment Management Plan, walking and cycling strategy, but also new national legislation such as the MPS for freshwater management and Te Mana o Te Wai. So once adopted, these objectives will provide an unambiguous direction to the program. They will inform the development of options, design processes, and any future designations if required, as well as land purchase processes. So I will take the report as read, but I'm happy to take questions.
Right, so do councillors have questions? I've got one myself, but around the table. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Walter, for your report. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about how you ensure that you don't have under capacity or over capacity in terms of, you know, long-term planning, because obviously there's a cost if you're under capacity, but equally there's a cost if you're over capacity. So how do you sort of get to a view on that?
Yeah, through the chair, there's a lot of dials and levers, of course, that we have to manage this capacity. But the assumptions are key, I guess, to how we design the required capacity. And when I talk about capacity, I don't just talk about capacity for stormwater flow. I also talk about capacity in terms of ecological benefits. And the two have a direct impact. So more planting results in less capacity for stormwater. However, it improves the aquatic habitat, of course. And similar thing, if we have more pedestrian crossings, for example, the ones in Richmond West that flood, or places for people to rest on a bench, they all impact on the capacity because they obstruct flow. So all these things need to be taken into consideration and be balanced in such a way that we cover and achieve all these objectives in the most cost-effective manner in the end. Because yeah, you're right. It is a wide corridor that we in the end need to purchase. But it's quite a few things that affect on each other in that manner.
Through the chair, if I may just add, but coming down to flood capacity in particular, we have a stated level of service which we try to achieve, which is a Q100 flow through Ball Creek. So that's necessary to make sure that the properties that will depend on this corridor for development and be protected by this corridor for development have a Q100 level of standard, which is a requirement under our usually for land development, as well as our own levels of service for growth. And the way they test that is they use hydraulic modelling. So there's a very sophisticated model that goes behind determining at any point in time what width is required to try and deliver that levels of service. And the council does try to maximise co-opportunity. So Rosh and I were just having a discussion yesterday, indeed, around making sure that potentially the walkways are below the Q100 level so that we can effectively get their capacity involved rather than having extra land over and above it. So we minimise the land acquired from individuals.
Councillor Tufnell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, very comprehensive report, and it's really nice to see the fact that it's balanced and takes in all the walkways and the rest areas, etc. And I mean, one as sitting here as a councillor, I mean, one has to assume, obviously, that the modelling methodology that you use is appropriate, particularly as we're going forward with the big question over weather patterns. I mean, we're sitting in one at the moment, which is a little bit, who knows what knows. So it does come across to me to be a pretty balanced report, and for that I thank you, and I'm happy to move, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Tufnell. I've got a question just in terms of Three Waters going forward. So we start this work and we will progress it until a certain date and time, and then possibly it gets handed over. Would that be a fair assumption? We won't know, and there's some legislation to be passed, but is that an indication that we've got?
there are certain assets that's really quite black and white that will transfer through to the three water entities, like, you know, your articulation for your water and wastewater treatment plants and so on and so forth. Some of the stormwater corridors provide a multiple purpose. Indeed, this report talks about the fact that this will be a multi-use corridor. Now, our expectation is that because its primary purpose is stormwater, that it will transfer through to the three waters entities, and that we'll have level of service agreements with them regarding some of the other uses, like, you know, mowing more regularly and stuff like that, to provide, you know, the recreation purposes and maintenance agreement around any path and stuff for transport. So yeah, our expectation is that Port Creek corridor and its tributaries will go into the new three waters entity, but I just want to flag that that is one of those discussions that have yet to be had, and it's one of those areas where new transition teams and new for entity C or D, depending on which we end up in, will make a determination on.
Okay, thank you for that. And look, I'm happy to second. Councillor McNamara, you've got a question?
Yeah, so given that we know nothing about pretty much stormwater in terms of three waters and how it looks, if something like this corridor doesn't end up in the three waters, or for example, what's upstream of just here, whatever park that is, it's a stormwater pond. So the cost of maintaining these things will fall back on council to the standards we're setting and all that.
Through the chair, that's a really difficult question to answer, because I think it's dependent on other people's decisions in the future. But my starting position, and I'm sure the council's starting position, would be its primary purpose is a stormwater asset, so it should transfer. And in fact, the level of service agreements should be for the stuff over and above that we continue to be responsible for, such as recreation and transport. If for some reason that wasn't the case, you would fully expect that the new three waters entity would pick up the maintenance and operating costs of the stormwater function. So, you know, that we wouldn't be expected to pick that up, because actually that is still its primary purpose, and they ought to pick up those costs. So yeah, sorry, it's not a complete answer, councillor.
All right, so we've had it moved and seconded. We've had 3 questions. I did. Are there any other questions? Or Councillor Ogilvie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm quite upset about this report, and you'll understand why. Because here we're proposing $35 million. 3 months ago, you yourself, Mr. Chair, the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Dowler from Motueka, reluctantly, grudgingly, gave $100,000 for the stormwater catchment management plan for Motueka. Here we are looking at 35 million, and there's no CMP yet. You know, I'm just lost for words. I'm so bloody angry about this. Really, I am. You know, and you can understand why I'm angry. Surely to goodness. Where is the public consultation on this? Where is the iwi report on this? Should this not be in the long-term plan? How much is the developers going to contribute? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's so much in here which isn't in here. This is a major policy statement, which if we agree today, will go right through the system. Tick, 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 tick. But when it came to Motueka, no, 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 no. It just upsets me hugely that this is happening at this time in our council at this late stage of the triennium. Really it is. You know, I just don't understand it all. You know, where's Marpur sitting there, for example? Marpur is the next policy off the line. Richmond suddenly comes in because it's Richmond. Look, let's get things in a district-wide benefit. We tick Motueka, next line is Marpur Bay. Richmond comes next, or even after that. But it's just, you know,
I know your concerns.
look,
but I'll let you start.
don't try and pacify us, because it is more important than that. And, you know, I would like to support this. I can see the merits. Councillor Tufton's pointed out some of the merits, but I think it's out of time, out of place in terms of the whole process and what we have done so far. So I have my questions answered. What is the public consultation so far? What is the developer's contribution? Where does it fit in lines with LTP? Those are important questions which we need to have answers from before this goes anywhere further.
Well, Dwayne, we'll give them the chance to answer those questions now.
Through the chair, in terms of I'll probably put in context. The council has a stormwater strategy, which it did consult the public on, which is meant to be a global strategy for all of our urban areas. Down from that is the catchment management plans. Richmond has a catchment management plan. It was adopted a few years ago, and we consulted on that as well. What we're talking about here is the implementation of aspects of that plan in particular, which is sits underneath the stormwater strategy as a whole. So there's been quite a bit of public consultation on those, and iwi have been involved all the way through that process. So they're familiar with the objectives that we have outlined here today and are supportive. In terms of, I'll try to remember all the questions, sorry. In terms of who pays for it, the development contributions largely fund the Bawk Creek program, and it's particularly true the further up the catchment you go. So down at the bottom by Lower Queen Street Bridge, for example, some of those works there were more 50-50 because they drained more of the existing area. The further up the Bawk Creek catchment we go, the less it provides any benefit for existing residents, and the more it provides for growth, and consequently the percentage of the projects which are paid for these works is very, very high. I think it's like 80 or 90% further up the catchment from DCs. Sorry, I can't remember that there was two other questions. Through the chair, so I think I addressed that in terms of it's really 3 tiers down from public consultation we've taken on other plans and strategies. I might just defer to Well to talk about the objectives for this specific activity and where there's been engagement with iwi, but really we're getting down to a level of detail which is totally consistent with the catchment management plan and the stormwater strategy, which have been publicly consulted on, and iwi have been involved all the way. Sorry, Councillor, there was one more question? Thank you. Yeah. What I can say is that there is quite a bit of funding in the long-term plan and the activity management plan for stormwater to continue land purchases and development of Bawk Creek all the way up through its tributaries. I'm pretty sure that's pretty comprehensive for the 10 years of the LTP. Further out, there probably be need.
I couldn't find it, Mr. Chair.
Further out beyond the 10 years of the LTP, and I have no doubt more budgets will be required because we're now entering into land that is being considered for a structure plan and rezoning in the future. But for the next 10 years, we've got pretty good budgets for the development and land acquisition. I probably will just make one further comment. Bawk Creek predominantly provides, especially the stuff we're talking about today, predominantly provides for growth. And it's very binary. We either provide for the level of service for protection or drainage, or the developments do not proceed. And when we come to Motueka West, which is in a similar situation, it's very similar objectives will be laid out for that corridor there too. So it'll be a Q100 level of service, and we're providing transport corridors and for the flora, fauna and biodiversity of that waterway as well.
Right. So I think that was pretty comprehensive. Mr. Mayor, you've got the question.
So following on from Dwayne's last point, do you also anticipate that the funding for the Motueka West is largely going to be paid for by development contributions in the same way that this project, particularly the upper stream components of it, are 80-90% funded by development contributions? And second question, what is that? So obviously we know that Richmond has both grown significantly in the last 5 years, and at the moment there's still the likelihood that it will continue to grow in the next 5. How does that compare with the growth that has actually taken place in Motueka over the same period?
Through the chair, in relation to the first question, I'd have to double check, but I'm pretty certain the Motueka west projects are something like 84% or something thereabouts DC funded. It might even be higher, it might be 90%, but I can't recall off the top of my head, but it's in that order. So very similar. In terms of the relative growth, Motueka is one of those areas where we know that there hasn't been adequate housing. There hasn't been adequate housing in any of the urban areas, but it's particularly acute in Motueka. There is a proportionally higher housing need in Motueka than in other places in the area, but in terms of absolute growth, Richmond is by far and away the largest growth area in Tasman. I think roughly half of the 600 odd homes per annum that we're being growing has been roughly in Richmond. Richmond West has been a key driver of that. In terms of the amount of money we're proposing to spend in Motueka West in this next 10 years and also in the asset management plan versus kind of Richmond for growth, they are, I'd have to say, roughly proportional. There's $6.5 million in Motueka West for the first stage of that area. There is a longer term project which is in the order of $20 million plus or something like that, which will be needed to develop the largely industrial land in Motueka West. So yeah, they're all proportional.
Right, well, I'd like to come back. This report's about this particular thing, not Motueka. So we've had one speaker against. We've had several for. Are there any other speakers? You've asked a question, so if you want to speak for or against the motion. Okay, I'll allow a question.
Well, I just wondered if we could get a response. Councillor Ogilvie asked about kind of like the hierarchy maybe, and he was mentioning Mapua, as though there was some sort of a gap. So could we just have an explanation around that, please?
Yeah, thanks through the chair. We take the same approach through the district. So we develop catchment management plans, and the catchment management plan sets the direction for future stormwater improvements in the UDA, the urban drainage area. So Richmond was done in 2019. We've just completed Motueka, and next one off the rank is Mapua. So we're currently in the process of going through the modelling and developing the catchment management for Mapua. And next one will be Takaka or Whitewater Wakefield. Yeah.
Is there an intent to workshop that those pieces of work at some point in the near future? You just talked about
Mapua.
Well, yeah.
We haven't planned it yet. We're not at a stage where we can have a workshop with the council, but I do know that staff
at some point
definitely, yeah, and staff are already in contact with the Mapua Association to join one of their meetings to present where they're at the moment.
Councillor Tu.
So with our historic information and the modelling, would you think, or does it show that Richmond is in the worst situation compared with places like Motueka? Because my concern is for residents, and if we're not addressing the flooding issues now, we're jumping ahead to future things. It just seems the wrong way around.
Through the chair, the driver here is growth. So the area of Richmond South and Richmond West would flood. Historically is known to flood. So in order to develop that area, we need to solve that flooding. And the way to do that is through the development of Boar Creek, and the continuation of that program goes into Richmond South. So that'll take care of the flooding and allow the development to happen.
I understand that it's more about the situation now, not so much about growth going ahead. It's about looking after our residents now. That's where I'm coming from.
And I think we had this previously at a report, at a previous meeting. Correct. No. It's been moved and seconded. I've got one more question. Councillor Butler, and then we'll put the motion.
Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, my question's about just about funding, and there's a suggestion that if that it's a bucket, and that if one area gets more, then another area gets less. Is that that's not real? Is that? Could I just have clarification that funding for projects could be looked at in this way or not? Because I understand that that is part of the concern about this project, that there's going to be more going to one place, which means that there will be less for another place.
Dwayne?
Through the chair, so the predominant funding for growth or related works is through development contributions. And in this district, you have 3 catchments for that. You've got a Waimea catchment, which largely includes Mapua and Richmond at the moment. You've got a Motueka catchment, which includes Motueka. And I think there might be some, that catchment might extend to Kaiteriteri. And you've got a Golden Bay catchment. Now, within each of those catchments, there is a pool of funding for those 3 catchments, and increasing or decreasing funding in one catchment doesn't necessarily affect the projects in another. It's not as if we're trying to manage it in that way, and you can't actually cross funding boundaries with development contributions. But I will just say at a very, at the very highest level, council has financial constraints on it as a financial strategy. And so every project and every spend that you make as a council is trading off against other initiatives and other projects. That is, but that is not just this issue relating to Motueka or Richmond or anything like that. It is a global issue. It's related to community facilities and stormwater, or roading and stormwater, or anything like that. I guess the only thing I would otherwise say is, we've tried to time the stormwater growth projects in Motueka to align with Wakatu's expectations, and they feel like they're fairly well aligned. I mean, Wakatu is progressing with its development, and we've got fairly good discussions with them around that growth project.
Everybody's had a chance to ask questions. Councillor Ogilvie, did you have another one of clarification, or you've already put your points quite forcefully, I think?
Well, I was going to say, because Mr. Wortman has emphasised growth. We have stymied growth in Motueka East because we're refusing to spend money on either upgrading the networks of the pipes, or refusing to spend money on water pumps, or refusing to spend money on electronic tidal gates. Now, if we had the sort of money we're talking about for Richmond South, we could do those things. But 100,000 won't do any of those things. We have people in Motueka in houses since 1950s. They've been paying their stormwater rate religiously and getting very little for it as a result. And this is why I'm upset about this proposal here. Even with the FDS, people in Richmond South were expecting some sort of public consultation before any development in Richmond South was proposed. This report today almost contradicts that expectation.
Public consultation has happened.
But it happened years, 2018, 19.
No, it did
That's
not.
4 years it is. The stormwater catchment management plan for Richmond was 27 to 19, which is exactly what Dwayne's just said.
I attended consultation last year in relation to Richmond South. So it was happened in 2021. I'm going to put the motion at this time. So we've got it moved, Councillor Tufnell, seconded by myself. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against?
No. And I'll have my vote before you.
That is carried, and please record that vote. Thank you, gentlemen. Move on to biostrategy. Now, Paul, I see you've got one of the members of your committee has been watching us on Zoom, but I understand you won't have speaking rights, or you don't intend to?
Peter Lawless, who was the facilitator for the independent working group and also supported the governance group, yes, is on Zoom. No, Peter wasn't going to do a presentation, but if there are points of clarification or detail, he's probably going to be the best person to respond to those. So thank you,
I've got some
Councillor.
advice, so that's fine. So he was in the part of the working group, and he was the facilitator. Yes. If we need him. Yeah. We will grant speaking rights to him if required.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Chair. So thank you, councillors. This is the Tasman biodiversity strategy item where the governance group for the biodiversity strategy is recommending to this committee that it receives this document, the Tasman biodiversity strategy, that it approves it for adoption by council, and that it instructs staff to work with iwi, landowners, other agencies to develop an implementation plan. Now, I welcome Mr. Todd's comments earlier on behalf of Federated Farmers. He highlighted for us the devil is in the detail, and that is where the detail gets sorted out, working with the landowners and the agencies to agree what each party will bring to the table and how they will progress that. And in terms of that devil in the detail, I'd also refer you to Objective 7 in the biodiversity strategy itself, which makes it very, very clear that the intention is to work very closely and to support landowners. And that section was actually drafted by Federated Farmers and New Zealand Landcare Trust members. So that is certainly the intention. So Gwynnie and I are going to do a bit of a double act here. And so my first one is, how did we get into this place? When we did the regional pest management plan some years ago, there were a lot of pests that we didn't have the finances or we didn't have the technical ability to actually address. And a pest management plan under the Biosecurity Act is quite a narrow instrument. And it was agreed by the joint committee of the two councils that a Tasman bio or biodiversity strategy should be looked at as a way of looking at the bigger picture. So that came out of the recommendations of the Regional Pest Management Joint Committee, which were endorsed by council. So that's where we got into this. What we've set out to do is to develop an empowering strategy, a high-level empowering strategy under the provisions of the Local Government Act. So under the Local Government Act, we don't have to have rules. It's the ability of council to look at its own area in its own way and put in place an agreement with the community of what its priorities are. It is not the National Policy Statement Indigenous Biodiversity. It shares a word in common, and it may evolve over time if central government requires it. But at this stage, it's very much a Tasman-driven document for our purposes. Gwynnie?
Thank you. So I'll just cover why we think we need to adopt a strategy now rather than waiting. So as we know, Indigenous biodiversity and our native flora and fauna in this region and around New Zealand is in crisis. And our community has really shown us that they would like to be doing more and acting in that space. As Paul has pointed out, the RPMP process highlighted this need through council. And the continued requests we get from community and partners through Tasman shows us that we really need a united way forward, a real strategy to bring us together, an ability to combine resources, allow us to be proactive and supportive of landowners and our community groups that are trying to do good work out there, rather than constantly just reacting to change coming from government. We need a strategic document that guides our biodiversity work within council. So currently we are consent order driven and not particularly proactive in looking forward and looking for ways that we can work with our community and be proactive. So we've recognised that there's some key drivers to this biodiversity strategy, the Tasman biodiversity strategy, including that we are signatories to the Kōtahitanga Mōtitaio Alliance strategy, and we are committed to delivering on that. The New Zealand Biodiversity Strategy, which was adopted in August 2020, requires a regional strategy to be able to deliver on that, and that is required currently under the National Adaptation Plan. This will allow us to support council bids for contestable public and private funding for biodiversity protection and restoration, giving us a strategic policy direction, clear goals and outcomes for our community, allows us to combine resourcing and give a really good argument for why we would like national funding. And if we want to remain purely statutory driven, this really does give us time in regards to the National Policy Statement on Indigenous Biodiversity, which we expect to be gazetted by the end of this year. It will require regional strategies to be developed within 3 years, but if we have an existing strategy, that will give us 10 years to relook at it. And that gives us 10 years to actually be on the ground, doing good work, working with our communities, developing our strategy as we go, and being proactive.
So in terms of how this Tasman Biodiversity Strategy was prepared, it was overseen by a governance group, and that governance group, the councillors are here today, chaired by Councillor Buckler, supported by Councillor Ogilvie and Tufnell, with at the table 3 chairs for iwi members in a co-governance manner. Generally, Harvey Ruru's proxy in Chapcock attended, but also Davine Stevens and Kura Stafford from time to time during that process in terms of governance. And it was set up so that at least one iwi member needed to be present for the governance group to actually pass a resolution or make a decision. So the checks and balances were in place. A working group.
You need to lean forward towards the mic or pull it towards you.
Sorry, Paul. Apologies.
Otherwise, those on Zoom may not be able to hear.
Yep, sorry about that. The governance group invited applications for a working group, and they basically made their call in terms of expert knowledge, in terms of sectoral representation, in terms of geographic distribution, so that working group was, as far as reasonable, representative. So the working group was set up independently, and Peter Lawless, who's there on Zoom, was the facilitator for that independent working group, who basically prepared this biodiversity strategy under the guidance of the governance group. So it has come to us through members of the community volunteering their time, and they were told it was going to take a year, maybe a year and a half, and they continued to work for 3 years to land it in this space. During which time they prepared a discussion document, which received, I think, 77 submissions, including submissions from Federated Farmers. They prepared a draft strategy, which was distributed and received submissions as well. They held, whatever the word is, public meetings throughout the entire Tasman district, Golden Bay, Bulla, the Waimeas, Kapawera. There were meetings held in all of those locations to draw out public views in terms of developing a biodiversity strategy. And towards the end, a separate meeting with Landcare Trust and Federated Farmers was held, which largely resulted in Objective 7 being included in the strategy. And further hui with iwi and hapu to ensure that the iwi practitioners had correctly assessed what the grassroots sought out of a bio strategy. So, so that was the process. And back to Gwynnie.
So moving forward from here, this strategy is a high-level document. It doesn't include rules. It is a guide, and it is designed to empower our community rather than enforce rules. therefore it doesn't include any implementation. So the next step would be to work with our partners, community, iwi, landowners, government agencies, philanthropists, anyone who's willing to be a part of this strategy to then go on and develop an implementation plan. And we are currently resourced with staff to be able to do that initial process around developing governance and working out how these different interested parties would work together, understand the resourcing that each of those partners would bring to the table and what projects they would be willing to lead, and how we would measure our success and progress. We do have a similar model that we can look to around Waimea Inlet Forum and their action plans, where we partner on some delivery, but we don't necessarily lead the delivery of every aspect. And in terms of funding and where we would best utilise our staff resources in order to implement this plan and this strategy, it would come back through the long-term plan process. So we're not committing any extra funding through this strategy. We would then develop an implementation plan and then come back to council looking for support or in deciding what we want to fund and what we do not want to fund.
Right, thank you.
Questions.
So we'll take questions, and I'll be looking for a mover and a seconder. I've got two people with questions so far. So Councillor McNamara and then Councillor Butler.
I'm happy to move it. As somebody who was on the pest management committee or whatever it was called, joint committee. It was clearly lacking that we didn't have a global plan or strategy, if I use the stormwater terminology, to address, I guess, biodiversity in the region and how we managed it. So it's good to see this come to fruition. So you've kind of answered one of my questions, at least in part, that by front-footing it, as future legislation is coming on us, which is not far away, the advantages are that it gives us more time. So we go from a 3-year have to do something to a 10-year have to do something or have to meet their expectations. Is that the only advantage we get?
In terms of future legislation, yes, that's the main advantage. But I think with the raft of legislative changes that are happening at central government level, it's going to become increasingly hard to run a process like this. It's going to be far more time consuming and people are already overloaded. So the fact that we've already got something, I believe, will buy us a lot of time and effort as well by having it in place at a high level so that we can move forward in our own way.
Great. And I think it's good to, I guess, give a heads up as to expectations that are coming, as untimely as it all is for farmers, I know. But in terms of the concerns raised this morning, so overstepping, we've got rules to come and they're going to be consulted on and well thrashed out before they're established. That's the plan.
We have seen an exposure draft of the National Policy Statement, Indigenous Biodiversity, and Council's also submitted on that. There's a lack of clarity in many of its provisions. It will be what it is when central government gazettes it. And it will take quite some working through, I believe, in terms of various sector groups. That's going to take a considerable amount of time. Federated farmers have already indicated that they're not happy about it. So I suspect, as we saw back in the 1990s and early 2000s with first-gen RMA plans, it may well wind up before the courts.
In terms of what we're passing today?
What we're passing today is a high-level strategic document. It will guide what we do in the future, but we only have to have regard to it. If council decides that it's had regard to and it's not going to apply a certain part, that's the decision for council to make. But it does provide that high level guidance.
And through the chair, final thing, I guess there's a concern from what we've seen before of where we go out and adopt a piece of regulation that in consultation with the community, and it's all voluntary, and then all of a sudden the rules change and what people thought they were voluntarily participating in is quite different. So we've got no guarantee going ahead that nothing like that can happen again, but that's the position we're in.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, that is the position we're in. But I think we're in a better position if we've actually got a well-considered community-supported strategy than then trying to make it up on the fly.
Well, thank you for that. I've got a list of 5 people with questions and I'll be looking for a seconder. So Councillor Butler, you are next.
Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, I'm happy to second this. And I appreciate the position that we heard in public forum. I think it's extremely difficult to untangle all this legislation and proposed legislation that's coming from government, and it does tend to get rolled into one. But I do have a question, and that is that it would be helpful to just have a little bit more detail on why on the difference between the Local Government Act, this being under the Local Government Act, and the RMA. We did hear yesterday at the workshop that the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity will inform the Tasman Environment Plan, which is under the RMA, whereas this strategy has actually been put together under the Local Government Act. So, by its nature, this strategy provides a framework for the community and for council to work together on what they're doing in terms of their conservation activities, either small or large. And so it can actually stand, I envisage it to stand quite separately from the Tasman Environment Plan, which is going to actually contain some rules. So this strategy can actually provide something for the community to not be compelled by, but to actually benefit the community as it provides a framework. So there won't be compulsion. But I would just like to have that, going back to my question, have it clarified as to the difference between the Local Government Act and the Tasman Environment Plan, and whether Peter Lawless is, able to give some clarification as to why he suggested that go down this road. Thank you.
Right, so the difference between the Local Government Act and the RMA, that might be best. Come,
I'll have a go here.
We'll go for it. You try, Paul, and if not,
okay, we'll
note what you say.
We'll have a crack at it. So the Local Government Act has general provisions, and under those general provisions, it allows councils to create strategic documents for their community and for their own operations. So that's what we're looking at here, a strategic document to provide certainty and direction for the council and the community. Under the Resource Management Act, you have what you call a first schedule process, which means there are a whole series of steps in terms of engagement, of proposal of plans, submissions and rights of appeal, which is absolutely appropriate where a document will create law or rules under law. So it's a different beast. It is far more structured in terms of RMA, and the National Policy Statement would oblige the council to give effect to its provisions. So those provisions would the council would have a bit of wriggle room, in terms of how it gave effect, but at the end of the day, it would have to give effect to.
That's a pretty fair answer. So I think that's a good answer. We'll move on to the next speaker, and Mayor King.
Yeah, look, I'm supportive of taking this approach, acknowledging the challenges are outlined in the public forum, but I think the advantages of adopting the strategy and under this process at this time far outweigh any of the potential risks that may exist with it. So I think going forward, one of the things I would like to see, I think the governance group, if you look at its makeup, I'm not sure it's entirely representative of a very broad sweep of kind of the community, landowners, etc. It does have a quite particular focus. I know there's been consultation outside of that group, but I think going forward into the implementation phase, we need to try and include some more of those landowner representative type groups into that level of the conversation, if that's going to continue through into implementation. That said, I think there has been interaction locally with a number of landowner representatives and federated farmers, and they've had the opportunity to input and influence. And section, I think, Objective 7, it is, has come out of that discussion. So I think that's been really good to see. This is obviously going to be a very challenging space going forward for local government generally. I think one of the other advantages is that this is something that we get to adopt as a council. All of the future decisions that are made, even under probably the final decisions around the Tasman Environment Plan, future rules and regulations which might flow out of the MPSIB, are likely to be made under the new process of the Natural Built Environment Acts and regional spatial planning legislation. That will be done by, we're not yet sure quite how our region is going to be determined, but by the independent planning committees on a regional basis, whether that's us as a unitary authority, us and Nelson combined, or us Marlborough and Nelson combined. We're waiting for that decision. But this is probably the last opportunity that the council is going to have to set a direction for our community based on our own consultation, collaboration, etc. So I think we should take it, put it in place. Do I love everything that's in it? No. Do I think it's a really good attempt to set a high-level strategy that covers a vast range of quite challenging issues? Yes. And like someone mentioned earlier, devil being in detail, the implementation of the Natural Built Environments Act and the final TEP will present some challenges. And once we get out into the community and have to start discussing the issues that we raised this morning about SNAs, inevitably that's going to produce some challenging conversations. So, yeah, really supportive of doing this at this time, not just because it buys us 10 years to work through some of those issues, but because actually it's an opportunity to set a strategic direction, and probably the last one the council is going to have kind of independently to do that.
Thank you, Mayor King, and I'm sure the staff will take on board your comments. Deputy Mayor Bryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to follow on from there, I've just got a couple of questions for around some of the detail. Firstly, just in the list of contents, and there's a sort of breakdown of areas. I'm looking at page 36 on our diligence. I'm not sure what it'll be on a paper copy, Paul. But it seems that the upper Bulla Kawatiri, there's quite a bit of detail around that, but the mid Bulla and Marawea, there doesn't seem to be any sort of forward or objectives around that. Is that deliberate or an oversight, or?
That's probably a question that Peter Lawless could assist with, but I'd just say that this came from the working group. It was areas that they brought to the table that they felt that there were issues and actions necessary. Now, what was definitely discussed right through the process is this is a living document, which, going back to Councillor Butler's question about Local Government Act versus RMA, under the Local Government Act, it's far easier to keep this as a living document and change it over time. So if it becomes apparent that an area hasn't been done due service, it's entirely within our means to amend this as we go forward, to pick that up.
So that may well come through the consultation, I would think.
Could well do.
Yeah. And secondly, just in relation to Objective 7, I guess is probably the best place to ask her this question. And Mayor King referred to SNAs, but I don't see any direct referral to SNAs or any plans around that. Is that also something that's going to be developed as we go along, or do we wait for the national legislation? Or
My belief is we wait for the national legislation.
yeah, who knows how long that will take. But of course,
well, Councillor, don't forget we have an active Native Habitats Tasman program already that's been operating for over a decade, has surveyed over 700 properties, and that's all been a voluntary program. It's assisted landowners appreciate what they have on their land. So this council is actually pretty well positioned in that space, but it is a voluntary program, and should central government regulate and require, that's a different conversation.
That's an indication that they will do that through early indications. And I guess once again we'll have to address that issue as we go through this, because that will be a big issue in the Mid-Buller and Marawea for sure.
Totally agree.
We'll progress now. We've got Councillor Hill and then Councillor Mackenzie, and then I'd like to put the motion. So Councillor Hill.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. I'm also supportive of the approach being taken here, and want to acknowledge the work of the governance group and Chair Councillor Butler and all the working group members and whoever the writers were of this. So really significant amount of work here. I think it also provides a great resource for some information and knowledge in a range of ways. I think that's really, really valuable. And just the very first note on language at the very beginning of it, I think is lovely, and it's a very good way of warming people up to how to expect, what to expect in terms of how this is being presented, in terms of not just language, but in terms of cultural worldview and the things that are important to Māori, iwi, mana whenua, and wider district community population. I think it's very good, and it flows quite well, I think, in terms often things that are attempted to be bicultural to some degree can get a bit clunky, and but I think that there's a good enough flow through it. I think there's quite a lot of richness in what's being presented here, and I think it's important to value that and acknowledge what's being produced. And the business about thinking about our region in a global context, about what's unique in it, that's really important. That's really significant, isn't it, to think that there are creatures and things that are here that globally are nowhere else. And I think it elevates what's presented and the whole point of it all, really. And the business about being at a crossroads and committing to the future where we recognise our place in the natural world. There's a whakatauki that speaks about what's the most important thing, he tangata, the people. Well, I've never sort of really, I get it in a context, as a context where that's really relevant and true, but largely I think it's not correct. And actually the environment comes way before we do, and we certainly can't exist without it. So I like the prioritising given in that way. Just wondering, in terms of the comment in it about council responding to the strategy through a formal policy process, can I just get a little comment about how that would be, next steps? Thank you.
I think that through you, Mr. Chair, I think that's an acknowledgement that as a high-level strategic document that the council will have regard to, it will have regard to it as it prepares the Tasman Environment Plan and as it prepares long-term plans in terms of what work programs and what funding is available. So those are the types of responses.
Thank you. And, I appreciate the comment in there about, how to go about some of this and supporting groups that are already active. So there's some pretty knowledgeable people out there in the community who do a lot of work, have a lot of data, know their neck of the woods intrinsically. And I think that's a really important aspect, is that, when there's resource to put towards this and furthering it, that those community groups are resourced to be involved, to the extent they can be. Just wondering when it's available for public, I guess once it's adopted here today. But I did have a question about its, I just thought it could be formatted slightly differently. So it just looks a little dense perhaps, but that's neither here nor there. So well done all those involved, and I'll certainly be supporting.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you very much. And I too will be supporting the resolution, and want to thank staff and the councillors for all their great work. And I also just want to take the opportunity to acknowledge the role that Peter Lawless has played over many years in this development. So thank you, Peter. Maybe just two questions I just want to get confirmation on. So when we're going to work with iwi, other agencies and groups on the development of an action plan, I'm thinking this morning of the in public forum with Federated Farmers. I'm assuming that Federated Farmers is included in our view of other agencies and groups.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then I guess my second question is the development of an action plan for implementation. I mean, with the Waimea Inlet plan, I have a feeling that plan was actually approved by the council. So with this action plan, who will approve it?
Once again, the council and the individual agencies who sign up to it. So there might be a whole pile of different approvals, and it might be Federated Farmers Exec. In terms of Federated Farmers, it might be Land Care Trust, but the council, yes, will certainly commit to what it chooses to commit to.
Okay, look, that's great. Thank you. I think that covers the concerns that I heard this morning in the public forum. Thank you.
I intend to put the motion, but we have to have a slight amendment. On the 2, it should read adopts rather than approves. So are the mover and the second are happy with that? We adopt it rather than approve it. And that's a matter under the Local Government Act that we have to do that.
Yes, yep, that's fine.
I've got a nod from Councillor McNamara and a yes from Councillor Butler. Thank you. So we'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried.
Yeah, I'll be very brief, but I would just like to acknowledge the people the volunteer groups that sat behind us right at the beginning, and with Peter Lawless. I mean, the amount of work that's been done there is quite incredible, and I think the council owe them a bit of a favour. Cheers.
Thank you.
And just over me too, Mr. Chair.
Yes, the NRDA CEO's got some time constraints. So we'll do this and then we'll set a time for Forest and Bird Golden Bay are going to do a presentation. So we'll be a little bit late if Cynthia's on Zoom. So Alan, over to you.
Morning, Mr. Chair and councillors. Thank you for accommodating that. So I'll take this report as read. Just remind councillors we had the briefing last week, so hopefully you had the opportunity to ask any questions about the economic regeneration plan then. The report requests the council to endorse the plan. So effectively that's giving it your support and your encouragement. We're not committing resources by doing that. I guess it supports the plan, but also the Project Kokiri collaboration. So I guess it's been really useful in terms of getting all the players in the economic development space working together and working towards the same end. As the chair mentioned, Fiona Wilson from NRDA is on Zoom, and maybe we'll give her speaking rights if required to help answer questions.
I'm happy to grant her speaking rights if we've got any questions over. So anybody got any questions, or do we have a mover or a seconder?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to move.
Any questions? And so
I'm just happy to second it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turley. So it's moved and seconded. We had a very good session with Fiona and her team last week and spent several hours, and it was very useful, Fiona, and we thank you for that. No one has any questions now, so you obviously did a very good job last week. So it's been moved and seconded. You've got the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Now, we could, if I can ask for people's indulgence, we could, since Cynthia is there, we could do the forest and bird presentation, 15 minutes, and then we'll have a break for a cup of tea. I'm not seeing anyone object to that. So forest and bird from Golden Bay. Where have I find it on my? Due to do a presentation. Cynthia, you're on Zoom. Can you hear us? You need to unmute.
I thought you were in control of that. Okay, here's hoping my Zoom skills will be good enough for the presentation and my share screen. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you the work that Forest and Bird have been doing. Whoopsie, she says. Have you got that? Oh, gosh. There we are. I hope you've got that now.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. So, yes, thank you for the opportunity to share with you the work that Forest and Bird have been doing in Golden Bay to protect our shorebirds and seabirds. So there are 7 important sites I'll be speaking about today. Please be aware that I count Rotatai Motopipi as one site as they're adjacent to and they merge with each other. 5 of the sites on the map are Ornithological Society of New Zealand sites: Tomatea Point, Taupora, Collingwood, Onaho and Rotatai. And data has been gathered at these sites since 1996. Our shorebirds use these sites for several hours either side of the high tide. They wait there until the tidal flats are uncovered by the receding tide so they can resume feeding. Shorebirds are often joined at these roosts by seabirds such as shags, gulls and terns. I'll start with Taupora. Taupora is a former freedom camping site. Sorry, hold on. I've just lost mine. In June last year, Forest and Bird planted 75 taupora trees and around 100 harakeke plants to screen the shorebird roost there. Adjacent to the site was a vehicle access point from the main Collingwood-Puponga highway. We blocked off the vehicle access onto the beach. With the help of local architect Andy Clark and ITM, who supplied the materials at cost, the men's shed were able to build our bird hide, transport it on site and install it in May this year. Numbers of shorebirds at this roost ranged from 350 to 500. Prior to the Freedom Camping site being established, this was a ground nesting site for variable oyster catcher, but it was abandoned due to the disturbance. We hope that over time they will return. I received an email from David Melville, ornithologist, last month. David said, "I was over in the bay at the weekend and stopped to visit the new hide. Congratulations, it is very good. And once the plantings get going, will be well screened. Thank you and thank Forest and Bird for all the work that you are doing to safeguard the bay for shorebirds. Best wishes, David." So just go to the next slide now. Okay. Forest and Bird have a policy of using signage that is friendly and educational. We have had very positive feedback about these signs. They were installed at Taupora and either side of the roost at Tomatia Point. Tomatia Point is sometimes referred to by birders as the Pakawa Roost, and bird numbers here can be in excess of 2,000. It's an international site of international importance for shorebirds. Oops, she says. Sorry about my skills, we're getting there. Oops. Ah, here we are, I found the cursor, sorry. The sleeping bird signs have also been installed either side of the Collingwood Roost and either side of the Onaho Sandspit. The Onaho Sandspit is both a roost and a ground nesting site for variable oyster catcher. Both Collingwood and Onaho accommodate around 350 to 500 shorebirds. The Parawhaka Oho is an important ground nesting site for variable oyster catcher and banded dotterel. Forest and Bird have installed this signage at both Parawhaka Oho and the pedestrian entrance to Rototau Motupipi. Whoops. Oh gosh. I'm sorry, I'm having a problem finding the...
We've actually got your presentation, so we're able to flip through as you
oh,
go.
okay then.
Well,
Yeah, I'm
I
just
certainly
having
have,
trouble.
I'm sure others have.
Okay.
Sorry.
We've also installed variable oyster catch signage at the Parawhaka Oho. And this is really important because variable oyster catcher densities along the Tasman district coastline are the highest recorded for any region in New Zealand. Okay. This makes Tasman a very special place for the shorebird. However, the Nicky MacArthur report commissioned by Council states it appears that local productivity is highly vulnerable to a range of threats acting on these narrow strips of nesting habitat, including disturbance by people, vehicles and dogs. On my own beach in Rangihaiata, Onaho, 11 pairs of variable oyster catcher raised only 2 chicks. So, Forest and Bird Golden Bay believe that most of the disturbance to our shorebirds and seabirds happens because people are uninformed. This is what we are hoping to address with our new information panel, Coastal Birds of Golden Bay. Our first panel is to be installed at the Taupora Bird Hide next week. We are looking to place these at 3 other sites in Golden Bay, Collingwood, Rangihaiata and Rototau Motupipi. The panel features 26 coastal bird species found on the Golden Bay coastline. It has a conservation key so people can see the conservation status of each bird, and each individual bird has both the Māori and common names underneath. The panel also features a QR code that when scanned takes people to the OSNZ website where they can learn about any of these birds on the panel. We hope that in learning about this taonga, people will develop admiration and respect for these birds. I'd like to finish by saying that prohibiting vehicle and dog disturbance at these sites is a priority for Forest and Bird. However, we cannot do the work of protecting our shorebirds and seabirds on our own. We need to work together with Council to achieve this. Thank you very much, and apologies for my lack of skills with PowerPoint and Zooming.
Well, we've got your presentation, Cynthia, and I understand your group's concerns, and there are difficulties with legislation in relation to this, but I think we all want to protect our treasures so that they're there for our murukapuna in the future. We've got 2 minutes for questions if anyone's got any questions, but I'm sure you're talking to your local community board and local councillors to seek assistance as we go forward.
Yes, we have the support of our Golden Bay Community Board and our councillors. Thank you.
All right, well, I don't see any questions or any hands up, so thank you very much for your presentation. If you councillors would indulge me, I would like to ask Mr. Kirby to come forward to just give us a quick briefing for 2 minutes on what's happening around the districts in terms of the state of emergency, which I think is appropriate before we have a cup of tea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you all know, there is a state of civil emergency, mainly focused around Nelson, the Maitai River. And I'm not going to comment more about that other than to say that I think there's about 233 homes have been evacuated in the Maitai Valley and through Nelson. There's a major slip up on the hill around Stanchel Ave. A house has gone down and 10 other houses evacuated. So that's Nelson City Council, geotechs and building inspectors are dealing with that. As far as our district's concerned, we have 5 roads closed that we look after. State Highway 60 is closed at Waitepu Bridge at the moment due to flooding. The other roads are Stafford Drive, Ruby Bay, due to rockfall and slips on the cliffs there. The New Walker Sandy Bay Road is got some underslips there, and that road is closed. Pigeon Valley Road, from about 5.8 k's through to 10 k's, there's trees falling down there, so downers are busy at the moment clearing those. The same with Dovedale Road. And Queen Street, Upper Queen Street above Hill Street's closed at the moment. We had a burst water main there this morning. Got nothing to do with the rainfall, but that's just something separate. So that's where that's at. Other than that, we are monitoring rivers. Obviously, it's still raining, but fortunately, the rain is not highly intensive, so the rivers will probably be staying up for a while. There's quite a bit of flooding around Pohara, the back of Pohara, and I think it's onto some of the private properties there as well. And there's a lot of surface flooding, lower Queen Street and the paddocks, and most of you probably, if you've driven through the country, you see most of the paddocks are full of rain, and I understand the Waimea River's well up at the moment as well. So, but at this point in time, we don't see any major concerns regarding evacuations or anything within the Tasman district at this point in time. So that's basically where things are at.
Good, thank you for that. And with that, I think we'll adjourn for morning tea. We have a presentation coming from Habitat for Humanity. So I'll just let you know that since the agenda was published, Habitat for Humanity have advised that their presentation contains confidential material on the grounds of commercial sensitivity. So the presentation will be made in our confidential session because of that. So let's have a cup of tea, everyone. Thank you very much. Chris is. Thanks, Chris. I need you 3 to have a quorum, that's all.
Oh, yeah. 350 mils over here and counting.
Good thing you're well up on the hill. Have you got a boat?
We were pretty good. Could get flooded in. We're flooded in at the moment, but all good.
Okay. She's up on the hill on the way to Pohara. All right, well, I think we'll start. I know the Deputy Mayor had a phone call to make and Councillor Cufnell has an appointment at some stage. So, Anna, over to you. And this is the climate change report, as I understand it.
Kia ora, councillors. I'm just going to take this report as read and happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Right. Let me just find it. Right, so any questions of Anna on the climate change report? This is an update. I see there's certainly been some progress made. No questions at all. So would someone like to move? Have you got one, Councillor Ogilvie? 148.
I've got one at the top of my head, if I may.
And then we'll go to Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just I see you alluded some progress on the EV charging stations at Kohatu, Sananad and Springs Junction. Have you had any more further information since writing the report or any updates?
I'm sorry, I haven't talked to Drew about that just recently, but it's my understanding that government's committed that funding to it. So I'm just not sure how soon they'll actually be in place.
Yeah, so no, that'll be good. I'll talk to you about something else around that offline sometime.
Thank you for that, Councillor Ogilvie, and then Councillor McMurray.
Sorry, I can't hear David.
Sorry, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you for the report, Anna, because as usual, it's detailed, comprehensive, covers a wide range of issues. But 4.16 on page 150 of Diligent, can you just elaborate on what's intended with the emissions reduction plan and when it's due and all those aspects? You're saying staff will have to complete this plan later in 2022. We've got 3 months to go. Is that going to happen or not?
Through the chair. So this will feed up into the Tasman Climate Action Plan. So it's going to be an internal plan more for directing staff work and generating ideas for potential inclusion in the Tasman Climate Action Plan. But for instance, it would have things like where we might install solar panels in various buildings across the district and which years in way more detail, whereas in the Tasman Climate Action Plan, we might just have a more generic action saying we intend to install solar panels on 10 buildings or something, for instance. So we've already done quite a bit of work on it. Neil has. He's been doing some modelling. He's been looking at costings, looking at around other councils, what they're doing. And we've had workshops with staff to sort of generate ideas. So it does tie in with the Climate Action Plan as well, though. So we won't actually finalise both of them until the same time. So that's more likely to be by June next year. But the bulk of the work will be done this year.
Right, I'm just aware of the, I suppose, newspaper articles about the events which happened in the city, protests about the emergency plan is pretty much low key and not a great deal of urgency in that plan. And I'm just looking at our own reduction plan for greenhouse gas emissions and thinking now, what can we do to probably make it more urgent? And the thought which came to my mind was to use a better more funding to originally sell all our own vehicles, fossil fuel vehicles, and replace them with EVs. Has that, without even looking at that as a consideration now, I mean, has the replacement of our vehicles part of your reduction plan?
Yeah, through the chair. So it already is part of the existing Tasman Climate Action Plan that we're looking at there. And actually the enterprise manager, Nick Chin, has commissioned, I think they're called Fleetwise Management, who are a contractor who are looking at our fleet and thinking of sustainable solutions for that. So that includes things like potentially reducing the size of our fleet, transitioning to hybrids and EVs. And I think that information is coming back to staff in September or so. So that's definitely part of the plan. But I think there's already a budget for that internally without having to use better funding. But
Councillor Ogilvie, they've actually bought an e-bike as well.
Right.
Yes, they do have an e-bike.
Yeah, my suggestion or recommendation may be a bit dramatic, but I thought it'd be worthwhile putting into your camp. And the other suggestion was that when the new council comes, just to assist you and the new climate advisor, it'd be worthwhile having a council committee of councillors, who just would report back to you on a quarterly basis sort of thing, rather than your own very long report. Or as well as perhaps. I just think that councill's input into that would be very useful the new term.
We'll take note of that if you want. Just put that forward to the new to the mayor when he comes to set.
Just thought you mentioning now would be appropriate. Thank you. Thanks for the chair.
Thank you for that. So I've got Councillor McNamara, Councillor Hill, Councillor McKenzie and Councillor Butler. So we'll start with Councillor McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions. 4.4, the tender process for public transport services has finished. Staff will soon advise a successful contractor to provide improved bus services from Richmond and new services to Wakefield and Mapua. So when does the new service to Wakefield start?
So those are hopefully going to start in mid next year, so the 1st of July, I think, is when they're.
So are we in communication with the current community bus operator?
Through the chair, so as what my understanding is that we're looking to use those community providers to expand the service, so to potentially connect up, say, Tapawera to Wakefield and then feed into the system. So I understand that Drew is working with that provider on those things. That's right. Yeah.
I don't think Mr. Bryant's online, but he certainly, the tenders panel has received the tender in relation to the new bus service that does include Wakefield. And I think it's 3 services each way a day.
Or thereabouts. And it doesn't include the community bus as such at this stage.
Just for clarity, because I'm picking this is about, does this affect current operators? The answer is they're part of the program, part of the game plan.
Yeah, I don't think they're part of that tender, but they are.
Correct.
Sorry.
I don't know if they've been part of the tender, but they've been part of the discussions, and we're looking to still continue working with them. Definitely, yeah.
Interesting, because it did seem somewhat of a different perspective that they presented in the last Wakefield Community Council meeting as to their expectations moving forward and what I'm reading here, but assuming we're in contact with them. Did we approve from Tapawera a bus?
No, it hasn't been approved, no.
Interesting.
No, it hasn't. That wasn't part of the tender.
Right. So,
sorry, can we just respond to that? Sorry.
So sorry, you're saying, did we include Tapawera and where we want to?
Well, you said something about a bus connection from Tapawera.
I was meaning that, so the community service that currently runs from Wakefield to Richmond, what we're looking at is changing where they go from Wakefield to somewhere else. So like to connect into the Wakefield to Nelson service that we will be providing as council. So as their community service could link up to our service by going from somewhere else to Wakefield is what I mean. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, it definitely doesn't sound like what they were envisioning, but anyway, I'll leave that in your capable hands. 4.5, you say that the environmental policy team has received some clear direction to guide future planning. I'm just wondering if we're all on the same page here. I was just wondering what that clear direction exactly is.
Through the chair, I wasn't part of that workshop, so whatever as councillors you discussed at that workshop is what they were referring to.
We might need to come back to you, councillor, on that one. Separate committee, of course, isn't it? So we'll come back to you and respond directly on that.
All right, so next on the list is Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora, and thank you so much for your report. It's really well presented and well articulated, and has got quite a lot of information and given its size. And I find it helpful to have something that outlines quite a lot of information at a district, regional, national, international level in a succinct way. So thank you for that, and that's the main point I want to make. I do note that we continue to 4.12. We continue to provide landowners with advice and support on afforestation, and staff are seeing high demand from landowners on how to revert hill country. So assuming the high demand is means I don't know what it means. High demand, significant increase, I guess, and what the past has been.
Through the chair, thank you for your comments, Councillor Hill. I am not sure in quantitative terms what that means. I guess they're just seeing more and more people come to ask. I guess we're getting more successful programs happening, and with the amount of slips happening, people are looking at alternatives. Yeah, thanks.
And largely are seeking advice and support. So in terms of resource, what is it that council has available to people?
So through the chair, the environmental information team has that's been growing their resource. So there's at least 2 soil scientists and other ecologists, and I'm not actually sure how many advice people, but maybe like 3 or 4 now.
Oh.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thanks for your report. Very good.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you very much through the chair. Yes, Anna, thanks for your report. I think you do a great job, because you must almost feel at times that you're running the whole of the council, because you're having to pull in so much information from every other aspect of the council's activities to actually get this report together. And I appreciate that that's probably not an easy task. So well done. I do have a question just around the we had the workshop that I attended on the refresh of the Tasman Climate Action Plan, and we had the youth involved here, and once again you did a great job. I'm interested to know whether the youth who were involved, whether they felt that it was a good engagement process, and whether they felt they had an opportunity to make their case.
Through the chair, thank you. Yes, I received very positive feedback from all the youth who attended. They really enjoyed being able to interact directly with your councillors and have those conversations and get their point of view across. They have asked me to continue working with them, so I'm working with Lani's team on how we do that best, and I've continued to have a few online discussions with them as well. 2 of the members are part of the leadership group of the Climate Forum, so I see them every month as well. So yeah, it's been great to grow that relationship with them.
That's right, because it's a pretty important topic for them.
Through you, Chair, I wonder if I could just make a comment. So having read this report, and thanks ever so much for doing that, it's hard work, like you say. I've come from a council that is probably about 15 years behind you guys, so I really applaud you for what you're doing. And they've got 1 person doing this. So I think the comment there from Chris, can we resource it? It's much better than Taupo District Council, put it that way. So well done.
We've got Councillor Butler. Councillor Mackenzie, are you happy to move the report? Yes. Councillor Butler.
Yes, I'm happy to second. And I did want to go to 4.5 for 4.4, the public transport, and just make a comment. I'm not going to ask a question because I know that you can't be an expert on everything. So I did just want to make a comment about public transport opportunities from Golden Bay over the hill, and we are expecting that Drew will come and talk to the community board about this, because voluntary drivers for a trust is kind of a bit fraught, because it means the driver would have to spend all day over the hill before they drove back again, which is quite a big ask. So we're just hoping that there can be a fruitful discussion with the Golden Bay Community Board and Drew as regards this public transport strategy for Golden Bay, because we do want to reduce the environmental footprint of people driving over to the bay all the time, and give them the opportunity, if they're tourists as well, to be able to come over on the bus, as well as locals being able to go over to do shopping. So, and I just endorse what other people have said, and thank you so much for the work. Yep.
Okay. I was going to just ask Dwayne, do we know if Nelson City has progressed their side of that public transport.
Through the chair, I understand they met on Tuesday. I understand everything's in train, but the next step in the process for the contract to be awarded, and I believe that's happening later this next week or so. So after that, there'll be public communications, and you'll be advised ahead of that about all the details, basically.
Good, thanks for that. So with that, I think I've got all the questions, and we've got a mover and a seconder. I intend to put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. And thank you, Anna, for a very comprehensive report. No, we have one more in September. Microphone, David.
Well, look, I think as a committee, I'd like to actually suggest a big thank you, or recommend a big thank you to Anna for these reports, because as Councillor McKenzie has said, she covers a wide range of activities which the council is involved in as a group. And the point you made, I thought, was very apt. And look, thank you for those reports. I, in particular, appreciate them, like we all do. So thanks, Anna.
We certainly do. Thanks, Anna. Well done. Right, so we'll now go to the strategy and policy environment policy activity report. So we've got Dwayne and Barry, and we're actually not that far behind, so that's not bad. So, who's first? Away you go.
Through the chair, I'll largely take the report as read. Thank you for your comments for Anna. She has been doing it by herself for quite a long time. I just want to say we are getting some additional support from her. She's getting support from Neil at the moment, and we're trying to get a climate change advisor. See how that goes in the next couple of months. Couple other points to make. David Arsenault is attending via Zoom. David, do you mind just popping your camera on, please? So we've been trying to recruit for a senior stormwater advisor for some time now, and David has now joined the team. He joined about a month and a bit ago. So if you don't mind just saying hi, David, please.
Hello, everyone. Good to meet you. Yep, taking over from Wouter as the Senior Stormwater and Rivers Infrastructure Planning Advisor. I'm very excited to get started. I'm imagining I'll be talking with this group quite a bit in the future.
Nice to meet you, David. It'd be good to see you in person next time we have a meeting.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. David's just shifting down from Palmerston North and just taking his time getting here. He'll be here next month, I believe, sometime in September. The other thing is less good news, I suppose. Both of our transport planners have resigned now, Drew and Claire. So that's a bit of a spanner in the works, the transportation planning program. In terms of the things that we've got going on, things like the public transport tender, the stock control bylaw, those things will conclude. We'll definitely close that out before those people leave. But some of the other work program will have to basically halt until we get replacements. So things such as a speed management plan and things like that. So just wanted to let you know that, and probably to adjust your expectations around the transport planning program until we get some replacements. Otherwise, the only other thing is I've been away from my usual role for 5 weeks for the term of this report, essentially. So I've brought in some support in the form of Walter and Alan to deal with any questions I may not be close enough to at the moment. Kappa.
Okay, so your part of the report goes through to page, I think, infrastructure thing, 160 something, doesn't it? Right. So, councillors, questions of Dwayne. I've got Deputy Mayor Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dwayne, I'm on page 161. Just right at the top, a new project river management plan. Could you just perhaps tell us a little about that? I'm assuming that this is all within existing budget, but I'm intrigued that you're looking at adding more X and Y rated rivers, and just perhaps if someone could tell us a little bit about that.
Through the chair, if this is one of those one of those line items where I was hoping that Welcome might be able to provide some detail that I can't at the moment. Sorry.
Yeah, through chair, those plans are indeed planned for through our activity management plan for rivers. The intention is to develop plans for all the XY rated rivers and get a more proactive approach in terms of how we manage and what activities we focus on in those rivers.
And so that's going to include additional rating areas at a higher level of rating, I imagine. Will there be some consultation around that?
At this stage, the plan itself doesn't include a rates review, but it might lead to that, and that has been identified previously as part of one of the key issues in our activity management plan for rivers. So the outcome of the plan might result in more work that needs to be done, and if that has an effect on rating, that there'll be a follow-on from that river management plan.
Thank you. And then if I go over the page to 162, waste management and minimisation, you're looking to do a waste assessment and a review. And then I think it goes on to say we'll have a waste plan jointly with NCC. So will you be looking to have some elected members in a governance role for that waste plan?
Through the chair, the waste assessment precedes the start of that plan, but absolutely, just like we did last time, we'll have a working group or a subcommittee working through with the two councils, developing the plan for consultation and consideration.
So were you looking to do that at next meeting or post the election? That was what I was, because you do allude here to September 22.
That's for the waste assessment. I believe the next step is post the election.
Okay. Because I think previously it had been for free, and I know both Councillor Dowler and myself have been on there at least once. But yeah, it's a matter of working jointly, and there is a little bit of work involved in it. So happy with that. Thank you.
I've been on that. There's certainly a little bit of work, or more than a little bit of work actually in that area. Any other questions of Dwayne? Councillor Ogilvie.
Through the chair, in terms of our projects that support development in Motueka West, in terms of Wakatu's intentions for developing the residential portions of the land, those are all go, or at least as far as I'm aware. What is in question is whether through the IAF process, Kainga Ora and Wakatu can agree on terms. They're just discussing at the moment. So, and it's been a bit of a prolonged discussion. I don't want to presume it will pass or fail or anything like that, but I'm just saying that at the moment there are a couple of points they're not meeting eye to eye on, and they're discussing it for the contract. I will say that regardless of the outcome of that, the council and Wakatu intend to progress with their development.
And the second question, Mr. Chair, the speed management plan being delayed, that's disappointing.
Through the chair, I mean, I'm anticipating a 4 or 5 month delay to that, basically, just as we recruit new people and onboard them, work through the program, and so it's simply a consequence of not having any staff in about a month.
It's just that we've been waiting a long time for this, Mr. Chair, and there'll be a lot of people on a lot of roads who are asking for a reduction in their speed limit, and it's just not happening. I've been around my ward, at Motueka Ward, we're looking at Robinson Road and Little Sydney Road and Marae Valley Road, and that's just 3 to name, and right across the district there are similar examples.
It's one of the most frequent service requests is people inquiring about the speed limit lowering, I noticed.
Exactly. And apart from new staff, are there consultancies, or can we work with the existing staff who are leaving and say, look, can you complete this job in the meantime? Or I'm looking for options.
Yeah, no, through the chair, fair question too. So Drew is going to Nelson City Council, so there's no question of him pursuing council work. Claire has been very successful in getting an excellent role at WSP Opus, and we've had that discussion with them, and they've already committed her time in the next few months. So we're it is because that was the very first thing I thought of too. So we either go to a new consultant and hand over when staff start, or we just delay it a few months. I guess one thing that's probably worth noting is that no formal decisions were going to be sought before the election. So, you know, there's a little bit of a grace period there, but it is disappointing.
Dwayne, sorry, is there remind me, is there a legislative timetable on getting these things in place?
Through the chair, yes, there is, but we're well ahead of it. So we were planning on having our plan in place a year ahead of the statutory timeframe, which is July 2024 from recollection. So we wanted to have it in place by the middle of next year. That means consulted on or adopted. So, you know, we might be looking at the third quarter of next year or the fourth quarter of next year instead.
We have to tell Drew and Claire that there are weekends and night times.
Yes, Councillor, I agree. But I do remember we did do some of these speed about 3 years ago. We did some changes. So we have done some, but it is frustrating. But it means our good staff get opportunities, and that's the nature of it. Councillor Mackenzie, question for...
It's more of a comment, if I may, Mr. Chair, and you know, it's always good to congratulate our staff when they do have good employment opportunities. But you know, I just wanted to note that I feel as though we've made great progress in the last year or two. If I think about the walking and cycling strategy and streets for people, and you know, the extension to the bus services, and I would really like just to say that I think Drew and Claire have done a fantastic job, and very sorry to see them go in a way.
Not as sorry as Dwayne and I, though.
No, you'd be right there. So that's all the questions of Dwayne. Oh, have you got a question of Dwayne, Councillor McNamara?
Yes, it's very disappointing to hear of the speed reductions not coming. Very disappointed. I do have a question about the wastewater modelling for Waimea. Was it Wakefield? Blah, blah. I lost it completely.
H161?
Yeah. So obviously weather not helping measure flow rates. Could be a while before we see dry weather. But I'm just wondering, so the capacity at the moment, given the wet weather and you know, infiltration levels, I'm just wondering how near we are to capacity. And
through the chair, actually it's wet weather we want. Yeah, so most wastewater pipes have ample dry weather capacity because they're designed for 6 times dry weather flow. So most of the time our wastewater pipes, there's 5-6 of the capacity are unused, and effectively the 5-6 of the capacity is for inflow and infiltration when you get weather. So when we want to know how the pipes will cope, it's in bad weather like this actually that we need the monitors in place. Unfortunately, we've had real difficulty in getting the monitors, the technology to put inside the manholes, and in fact some of the manholes themselves have presented some challenges as they've busted shut the lids. So yeah, what I do know is that the team put in some place some measures just for this event to try and get a sense of how the trunk main from Wakefield through to Brightwater was coping. And I'm sorry I haven't caught up with them since they put those measures in place. What I do know is that theoretically the model suggests that it's very at near capacity, if not exceeding what the model suggests would be its capacity.
Right, so Dwayne, I think that's all the questions for you. We'll move on to Barry. And you go from 1-6, Barry's reports from 164 through.
Right, thank you. Look, I'll take the report as read. It's relatively short this time. Just to note that we do have a short confidential briefing on the water conservation order later. So if you have any questions on that, maybe we could hold off until that briefing, just given that it's still sub judice. So thank you. Happy to take questions.
So any questions for Mr. Johnson at this time? I'm not seeing any. I do have some in relation to the plan change as well. But that's, we're
Committee, is it?
we're going into committee for that. So no questions. So we've had the report. Would someone like to move the report be received? Do I have a mover? Councillor McKenzie, a seconder, Councillor Ogilvie. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Now, thank you, gentlemen. Now, we're now going to move into confidential session, and I'll just read this to everyone. Procedure motion to exclude the public. Confirms that in accordance with section 48.5 and 48.6 of the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act 1987, that Nick Clark, Habitat for Humanity, be permitted to remain after the public has been excluded for item 8.2 of the confidential agenda Habitat for Humanity presentation, as they have knowledge related to Habitat for Humanity that will assist the meeting. The public be excluded for the following parts of the proceedings of this meeting: the general subject matter to be considered while the public is excluded, the reason for passing this resolution in relation to each matter, and the special grounds under section 48.1 of the Local Government and Official Information Act for passing the resolution follows. This resolution is made in reliance of section 48.1A of the Local Government and Official Meetings Act 1987, particular interests protected under section 6 and 7 of the Act. Would be prejudiced by the holding of the whole or part of the relevant proceedings in public as follows. Habitat for Humanity, it's commercially sensitive. That's why. And we have a plan change that is also commercially sensitive. Or there's another section under the Act, but I'm sure Barry will tell me when we go to that section. So that covers Habitat for Humanity. So I need someone to move that we move into. Moved Councillor Bryant, seconded Councillor Turley. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Now we have to disengage any members of the public from that, and we're allowed to leave. We've got board member Armstrong, who's a member of council, so he's left anyway. I actually think he could have stayed, but that's all right.